The weapons pact has been discussed in Europe today by the UK and France. It's in the face of a string of global threats, which we will discuss with Sir Alex Younger, who ran the UK secret intelligence service MI6. In fact, he was its longest-serving chief for 50 years. The special advisor to the German Marshall Fund, Georgina Wright, is here, famed as a mind reader of the French. First, Sir Alex, a new nuclear arrangement between the UK and France. Rate that in your career. It hasn't happened before. I've said you were there for 50 years or however many you were there.
Look, it's good news. It was a privilege of our generation that we never had to think about this stuff, and the idea of mutual annihilation was a thing of history. And we thought those days were over. But Putin thought differently, and he's prosecuted his war in Ukraine with the implicit implication of the threat of nuclear force. He's intimidated people. He's abused the privilege of possessing nuclear weapons. He's undermined the premise of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that mandates a response. So Europe is sort of slow to move, but it's got Britain and France, both nuclear weapon states, and this is an overdue move. Success will be if enough doubt is planted in Putin's mind that if he attacks Latvia, or wherever it is, there will be a nuclear response from France and the UK.
I mean, it feels like a first step towards a European nuclear umbrella. It really does. It's symbolic. This is the first time in 30 years that we have new language about nuclear cooperation between the two countries and a clear European dimension, which was so necessary. I mean, just days before the German election, you have the now German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who said, we need to have a discussion with France and the UK about their nuclear sharing or potentially nuclear deterrence because they just don't trust the Americans as they used to.
So is that basically telling us that the Americans are in doubt with their umbrella? We have to get the French-British one going? I
think that it makes sense to create as much uncertainty in Putin's mind as possible.
So how will this land in Moscow, this announcement today?
He's screwed up, frankly. So he's precipitated. You know, he started this war on the premise that NATO was irredeemably hostile, intent on moving west, that everyone had it in for Russia. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
He's blown
it. He has created those conditions. And now, look, we're talking about nuclear cooperation between France and Germany and Europe in a way that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago.
But it's interesting, Alex, isn't it? At the height of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union, I think we could agree, was a pretty serious threat, we didn't feel the need to have this cooperation with France. We do now. What has changed? Is it because there is that Donald Trump question mark over his commitment? It's interesting, as I understand it, the authors of the recent Strategic Defence Review sought assurances that the UK nuclear deterrent really is independent. I mean, as you'll know better than me, the subs, they're ours, the warheads are ours, but the missiles are shared in a US pool. Interesting they had to get that assurance, a concern about whether we're truly independent.
Yeah, and France, of course, is completely independent. I think our launch sequence is truly independent. I'm very glad to see that we've procured a second means of delivery. And this is what our new world looks like. It's not that America's become less reliable per se. It's just that they cannot police the world now. We've got to do some of this ourselves. And I think that's reasonable.
Back to Alex's point about Putin playing the politics of Europe wrong. Could this summit have been feasible 5 years ago in the chaos post-Brexit, the Anglo-French summit?
No. I mean,
how bad was the relations then?
5 years ago, things felt like we were going from bad to worse. It was Brexit, it was AUKUS, it was spats about small boats, it was spats about fishing rights. Political relations were very, very low. I was sitting in Paris, and I remember being British at that time was not fun in Paris. And it's a lot of explaining between the two countries. And look where we are today. I mean, the war in Ukraine brought Paris and London together, undoubtedly. And President Trump has accelerated that.
So this is the thing. When I look at Macron and Starmer talking now, it demonstrates the narcissism of the arguments we had around Brexit for 5 years. The extent to which our country turned in on itself looks ridiculous with hindsight. This is a serious issue, and we're rising to the occasion.
And these divisions in our polarised West, they're great for our enemies, aren't they? Because they love to see us use all of our free speech rights to slag each other off. And this sort of thing is showing a bit of muscle that we can, despite all this horror, we can achieve something together.
Yeah. I mean, everybody thinks that Xi Jinping is terrified of US aircraft carriers and, you know, they're big and frightening. What's frightening about the West is the quality of its teamwork and its alliances. And sure, we show our disagreements in public, but that cooperation is something our autocratic rivals cannot achieve. And Putin knows that. So this is scary stuff for him.
And is there a version of this where the Europeans have boosted defence spending? France and the UK have done a rare deal, which they have never done before since they both possessed their 2 bombs. And Trump may be oscillating back towards an anti-Putin stance. Could that all be happening?
And meanwhile, Germany is doubling defence spending. Putin has conjured into being the very world that was a lie and is now the truth. And for reasons I honestly find hard to explain, he's pushed it too hard with Donald Trump, as you say. He can't win militarily. He can only win if Trump gives him what he wants. And that's looking increasingly unlikely. He's misjudged it.
And to you, Georgina, just listening to Rita on the 10 o'clock news say that Ukraine is braced for possibly 1,000 drones a night. So what's going to happen to the European sense of solidarity and this mooted boots on the ground, which went away, this comment? What's going to happen with the Ukraine situation?
I mean, I think that was also an important part of this summit, was the European dimension, which is both what we do for European security, but also what we continue to do for Ukraine, which is at war at this very moment. And yes, there's more we could do, and there are promises in the Franco-British declaration about producing more capabilities, about working with the Ukrainian army, and of course, if there is a ceasefire, big if, that we are prepared to have a reassurance force on the grounds in Ukraine to help preserve peace.
It must be understood that since Brexit, I say this also with honesty because I know this is not the case for you, Mr. Prime Minister, but many people in your country explain that Brexit would mean that you could more effectively fight against illegal immigration. Put simply, it has been since Brexit the United Kingdom lost its migration agreements with the European Union. The current situation is therefore the exact opposite of what the Brexiteers proposed, or promised rather.
This event, of course, was to herald what we now know to be an exchange of historic artefacts. We will be receiving the Bayeux Tapestry to the British Museum. There's George Osborne, of course, got out of politics after newspaper editorship and now is in charge of the British Museum. It's interesting in that exchange there how we knew this was going to happen. I put it to you, by the way, that the Bayeux Tapestry, which is a tapestry to commemorate the Norman conquest of the Anglo-Saxons, was actually woven by English women in England. Perhaps there's a good argument to never return it. It's as English as St George, as English as fish and chips. I'm still with Olivia Utley and I'm still with Nigel Nelson. Of course, you say out there, fish and chips isn't English and neither is St George. We have that conversation every St George's Day. Something I picked up on there, Nigel Nelson, straight away. Why was Emmanuel Macron surrounded by 2 European Union flags? It's got nothing to do with the European Union. He's here to represent France. He had 2 of those flags, one either side of it.
He's here to represent both. He's here as a representative of the European Union and obviously as the President of France. And this is the first time we've had an EU leader here for a state visit since Brexit.
He's not an EU leader. He's a member state leader. He's got nothing to do technically on paper with the EU. That was him showing his true colours.
Well, he's the EU leader in the sense that he's the President of France and therefore a leading member of the EU. So the idea was that he would actually show both. He's already said he regrets the fact that that Brexit took place, but he respects our decision, which I think was fair enough to do.
You don't think that he just had those flags there, almost like to stake them in the ground, to make his stake that at one time, there'll be another star on that flag. This should not be about the European blooming Union. This is meant to be about an exchange of artefacts. This is meant to be from France to Britain. Got nothing to do with Brussels.
Well, I mean, wherever he's gone, he's actually had the EU flag with him. So that has been part of the state visit. You're absolutely right that this specific thing is about swapping the Bayeux Tapestry for the Sutton Hoo treasures that we'll send over to France. And you're right, it's done by English women. But in fact, at the time, if you remember, we were all one. So England and Normandy were one nation.
Well, they conquered us in war.
Exactly. That's why we became one nation.
and so, therefore, we can enslave British maiden, the finest crass women in our land.
I have no idea whether they're enslaved or not,
OK, we're not kidding about. We're having a bit of fun. I want to introduce my next guest now, and that's the former...
Haha, Tufty.